try that again. Let's scan the card again. So it happens a second time. Insufficient funds. Well, the young guy in front of me turns to me and he was like, a lot of people don't know, but he's like, that's a SNAP card. When they cut the benefits, they went retroactively back. He said they froze all the funds on the cards. I didn't know that. So she said, well, let me try another card. And she swiped the other card. Same thing. That card didn't work. And now she's getting nervous and she starts saying, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I probably have to put back half of the stuff or maybe even everything. And by then, 2 more people had gotten in line behind me. So now there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of us in line, plus the lady at the cash register. And finally, I knew her card wasn't going to go through. And I just kept thinking back to this scripture. I was working on my sermon, and I'm like, all right, it's time for a little intervention. So I said, I'm going to go take care of her. And I walked up and I said, ma'am, I pulled my card out. I said, you're not putting any items back. I said, I got this. And it wasn't much. It was maybe $10 or $12 worth of items. But for her, that was a big deal. And she started pulling cash out and she insisted that she pay for them. And she's like, no, she's like, I think I have enough money. Let me see. And I was like, no, really, I got this. And so we went back and forth for a while, and I wasn't about to get into a fist fight with an elderly lady in the line at Dollar General. And so I wanted her, she wanted to take a little bit of ownership, and you don't take that away from people. And so she had enough cash. She paid for it. I got back in line, and she turned around and she began begging for our forgiveness. She was apologizing to us, saying, I'm so sorry that I took up your time, and I feel so embarrassed. And she begins weeping. And the young guy in front of me was a super cool guy. And he says, ma'am, are any of us laughing at you right now? He's like, you take your time. None of us have anywhere to be. You do what you got to do. We're all here for you. And I thought it was one of the sweetest moments where somebody was kind and somebody was gracious and somebody was sweet. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about the guy in front of me. That was the sweetest thing that somebody could have said. But we need to help our neighbors out and not even question it. This past week, I don't know if any of you have seen this viral thing. Today's lesson is being a yes in a world of no. There was a viral series of TikTok videos this past week. I guess the week before, but this week they really ramped up, and it was in the news everywhere. But it was this lady. Her name is Nikaylee Monroe. She is a self-proclaimed lesbian non-believer. She doesn't believe in God. She's very open about that. And she wanted to do a social experiment. And she wanted to call a whole bunch of churches. She's from Somerset, Kentucky. But I thought this was really intriguing. So I watched some of her videos, and she was calling churches up, and she was pretending to be a young mother with a baby who hadn't eaten since the night before. The baby was out of formula, and she was very sweet. She was like, I was like, if I had taken this call, I definitely would have thought it was authentic. I mean, she was very kind. She was very sweet. She wasn't pushy. And she just said, I have this baby, and she played a tract of a baby crying in the background. And she said, I'm so sorry to bother you, but my baby hasn't eaten since last night, and I don't have money for formula. And if you guys can get formula, I'll even come to the church and I'll pick it up. Out of 43 churches that she called, as she started calling outside of Somerset to then she called in different cities across America, out of 43 that she called, 33 were a hard no. The first person to say yes was a mosque. The second person to say yes was another mosque. The third person to say yes was a poor black church. And then there was a poor Hispanic church that said yes. And then after that, there were a couple here and there. And she was the sweetest lady because at the end she said, I want to stop you there. This is just a social experiment, and I was just calling to see if churches would help. And for the ones that said yes, She's like, you are an absolute rock star, and you are changing my view of who God is for the good. And then she put it out there. She's like, hey, if anybody's in the area, I want you to go to this church. I want you to try this church out because they were so kind to me. And now there's a viral video where she got together with this elderly preacher at a church of God. And he was the kindest guy. And he's like, ma'am, we don't have formula here, but he's like, I'll go to Walmart for you. He's like, I'll go right now. I'll pick it up. Is there any particular flavor? And like, he was the sweetest guy to her. And she was almost in tears. And she's like, what a sweet gentleman. So there's a video of her. She went to the church and she met him in person. She's like, I've got to meet this guy in person. And so they have they're kind of hugging. And she was just saying, like, if anybody wants to support a church, this is the church to support. That church overnight received over $100,000 in donations from people all across the world, people whose hearts were touched. And I just thought it was a fascinating social experiment, which, by the way, I'm all for. Sometimes they feel a little bit sleazy. I thought it was done well. It was respectful. She was very open that she's not a believer. But she also was open to the idea that I want churches to pass. I don't want churches to fail. I want to believe that churches are saying yes to a young mother who has a crying baby who hasn't eaten for a day. It was a very fascinating social experiment, but the answer for most of the churches was a hard no. And so this is the hard question for the church. If anyone has the world's goods, John says, if anybody has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? That's a great question. You remember the story of the priest and the Levite. There was a man who had been beaten up by robbers. He was left bleeding and left for dead on the side of the road. Well, the priest and the Levites, according to the old law, they couldn't come into contact with somebody. They couldn't come into physical contact with somebody who was bleeding, or else they would have to go through purification, and they would be considered unclean. They couldn't touch anybody. They couldn't socialize with anybody. They would be unclean. And so they're on their way, and what do? They cross to the opposite side of the road, and they pass by literally a bleeding man on the side of the road, and they keep going. They were the institution. They were the churches that Nikali called, and they said no. They had the rules. They had the purity codes. According to the scripture, they were doing the right thing in one area. They justified saying no to the guy who was literally bleeding out, and they passed by on the other side of the road. Interestingly, in Pittsburgh, there's another viral story. By the way, Nikali had 300 followers on TikTok. She was not like this big TikTok star. I think now she has like close to 1 million followers since she did this series. But there was another TikToker in Pittsburgh who hardly had any followers whatsoever, who has now made a very big splash in the news. His name is A.J. Owen. And he came together with his 7- and 9-year-old sons at the end of October, and he was really bothered, like he was losing sleep over the government shutdown. And he said, I know that I have people on my block who are going hungry. People who are not getting food because they don't have SNAP benefits. And so he talked to his 7- and 9-year-old sons, and he was like, hey, what do you guys think we should do for our neighbors? How do you think we should help? They were like, well, Dad, that's easy. They're like, let's fill a couple totes with food and put it out in our front yard and put a sign, feel free to take food and feel free to give food. And they're like, it'll be like kind of a pantry, and, we can help people that way. He says, like, all right. They have 2 bins of Christmas lights and other Christmas decorations in their garage. He said they were run down like ugly bins. They emptied them out. They took a Sharpie, and they scratched out out the thing that said Christmas decorations, and they put a sign on it. They put it in the yard. And in the morning, 70% of the food was gone. And he said that really touched his heart because he was like, wow, people actually really need it. And we're making a difference in the lives of people. It may not be in the whole world, but right on our block, we're making a difference. And then he opened his mailbox. Inside of his mailbox was an envelope. It didn't have a name. It didn't have anything that identified who had left it in his box. And he's like, it felt really thick. And it just had a little note, and it said, hey, this is to help the people in need. And he opened it up, and he started fanning through. It was a thick envelope full of $100 bills. And so he did a follow-up TikTok, and he's crying. He's literally weeping. He can't talk. He was crying so hard. And he was like, I never in my wildest dreams imagined, number one, that somebody would trust the neighborhood to put an envelope like this in a mailbox. Number two, they trusted me that I would take the money and I would use it for good. He's like, they put a whole lot of trust in a whole lot of strangers. And because of this, so many more people are going to be blessed. Well, that wasn't the end of the story. He put that TikTok out, and it got somewhere around 18 million views. And people started posting pictures of their front yard food pantries that they put out in their own yards in their own neighborhood all across America. That all happened within the last 2 weeks. And people aren't stopping. SNAP benefits resumed, but these pantries continue. I love this story. There was no board meeting. There was no budget approval. There was no bureaucracy. It was a simple individual saying yes. And it affected literally millions of people. So the Good Samaritan is the hero of Jesus' story. He wasn't a religious leader. He was a Samaritan. He was an outcast. He was a heretic. He was unqualified according to all the Jewish people. But he saw the man bleeding on the side of the road. He had compassion, and he acted. He cleaned up his wounds. He took him to an inn. He put money down on the counter, and he said, I will personally pay for this. I have to go on a trip, but when I return, if there are any more charges, charge that to me personally. I will pay the man's debt. He was the unexpected individual yes in the story. Jesus replied when he's telling the story, which of these three, the priest, the Levite, or the Samaritan, which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man? He said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. This morning during class, we were talking about the simplicity of Jesus' message, the simplicity of his mission. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. That's it. That was his mission. Jesus said when it comes to caring for other people and nurturing other people and taking care of their needs, just do it. Go and do likewise. By the way, as a follow-up for Nick Haley Monroe, the churches who said no, actually several of them, it wasn't just one, it was quite a few of them. They decided they were going to do their own little TikToks and sermons, and they labeled her a Jezebel, a witch, an unbeliever, somebody with a stained heart. She's out to get the church. And I mean, they went on and on and on just berating her. And I think that's so telling. Whenever Christians behave like that. And the question is, what if she really was a struggling mother with a hungry child? Would that change the way that they talk about her? Probably not. Honestly, probably not. Joel Osteen's church was one of the churches that she called. That was a hard no. Sorry, we don't have a food pantry. Joel Osteen has a multi-million-dollar mansion. He's got several, not one, he's got several Lamborghinis and other exotic cars. It's a good business to be a preacher in Dallas. The church said no to the crying mother with a baby crying in the background. So the man replied, well, the one who showed him mercy, that's the one being the neighbor. Jesus said, you go and do likewise. So the no is the rule side, the institution side. The churches in the video were likely worried about liability or wise stewardship. And we talk about this. I mean, benevolence is hard. It's not easy. We get such a vast amount of calls that we can't say yes to everybody. We just can't. There's not enough money to take care of everybody's needs. There's just not. And so stewardship comes into play, and it's hard. It's not easy. But I always say, a mother calling saying, I don't have baby formula, that's a no-brainer. That is an absolute, that's not like, let's get the committee together and figure out what we're going to do. You take care of that need, and you do it immediately. So the priest and the Levite were worried about the purity laws, and they chose their rules, which they appealed to the scripture. They chose that over mercy. But the yeses, the dad in Pittsburgh, A.J. Owen, and his 7 and 9-year-old sons, and the Samaritan, they saw a person and not a problem. They saw a need, and they chose mercy over rules. And again, I get that it's complicated when you're helping people. Some of the needs, I gave Liv some hard scenarios on Wednesday, and they were emails that I had received. One was like a couple $1,000 back payment for subsidized housing, like $1,800. If this isn't paid, this person gets kicked out of subsidized housing and will literally be homeless. $1,800, that's a pretty big chunk of change. Another one was over $6,000 for a repair on a home that got water damage, and the upstairs bathroom is literally about to fall through to the second level. Insurance said no, they can't help. Other churches have said no. They're between a rock and a hard place. $6,000 and $1,800, those are just two of a whole bunch of emails that I got this past week. So it's complicated. I understand that. I get that. But we need to be asking these questions. How do we help? How do we help the person in need? How about the healing on the Sabbath? There's a man who entered a synagogue, and Jesus sees this man with a withered hand. And the religious leaders, they don't see a man in need. They see a way to test Jesus. They want to test him and see if he's going to mess up. Is he going to heal on the Sabbath? Jesus knows this, and he heals the man. And he said to them, Jesus says to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? But they were silent. And he, Jesus, grieved at their hardness of heart, said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The very next verse says, and from that point on, they were trying to find a way that they might destroy him. That is Jesus. That was their response. We're going to destroy this rabbi who healed the man's hand. It wasn't celebration that a man was healed. And so the heart of the Father is to give bread. We know this from Matthew 25. It's our theme for this year. He chooses bread over a stone. Jesus said, which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? A mother asked for formula, for bread for her child. 33 out of 43 handed her a stone. And it's a question that we need to ask ourselves as Christians, as a church, as individuals. What are we doing about the needs in our community? Trust me, they're there. There are so many needs within the community of Somerset. It is astounding. So the question is, number one, do we notice? Are we like A.J. Owen, who probably, honestly, didn't see people wrapped in, head linens and, like struggling to walk down the street? I doubt that he saw that in a suburb in Pittsburgh. But he just knew, his heart told him there are people struggling to afford to pay food. Talked to his kids and said, what do we do about it? So here's what we do. We empower the individual. The individual, yes. We empower you all. Because the church as a whole can't possibly take care of all the needs, but we individually can work together. We can find people in our life, we can find people in our neighborhood, and we can take care of individual needs. We see the person and not the institution. A lot of times people say, well, I'll have to talk to my church because, that's how we get help to people. We don't always have to go through all these channels to help somebody. If we see a neighbor in need, we absolutely can help a neighbor in need. And when we partner with the collective church and we all do it together, it really shifts. There's a dramatic shift that takes place. And we begin to see things like what happened in Pittsburgh with A.J. Owen. He just simply did it, and then literally millions of people caught wind of that, and hundreds of thousands of people began putting boxes of food out in their yard. I love that story. You've got to look it up. You've got to watch the videos. It's absolutely powerful. You start small and you start now. A.J. didn't need a committee to start a blessing box. He didn't need it to give him, we don't need it to give a mother a can of formula. We just need a heart that says yes. And Jesus is calling every single one of us to be yes to the person in need. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and be well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. That's James, in James 2:15 through 17. And again, go and do likewise. Will we be, as a nation, an institution of no, or will we be a people of yes? I've been praying about this, and I always start thinking about the theme for the next year. And I'm thinking about all the times that we've had to say no. Julian in Haiti, the needs are just endless in Haiti. I've said no many, many times just because the money's not been there. They're legitimate needs, but the answer has been no many times. I want to change that. Instead, I want to say, how much? And let's ask God, how do we open up, how do you kick open those doors to provide for people in need? How do we help people? How do we stop being a people who says no? And how do we find ways for you to bless us so that we can bless others? I want you to be in prayer about this and be thinking about this and pore over this. And find somebody this week. Find somebody to bless. And I promise God will not ever disappoint. If there's anybody this morning who's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have prayer needs, we'd encourage you to come up. We're all going to stand as DP leads us in this song.